Hello again, friends, and thank you for joining me. I am back here at home in Chicago. I've got my home bar behind me, as you can see, and we are going to be tasting a whiskey today that is one that I've really been excited to try for a while now. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to have my very first taste of it with you. So I'm going to show you what that whiskey is, and it is this. Maker's Mark Cask Strength. So this comes to us in batches, so we're going to be tasting the batch number 2002. Comes to us at 110.4 proof or 55.2% ABV. Maker's Mark is a brand that is kind of funny to me right now because you see people going crazy for these brands, particularly on social media. People are wild about Weller or any of the Buffalo Trace stuff. Wheated mash bills seem to be particularly in favor, and yet nobody talks about Makers. I mean, it is not something that people brag about or people are seemingly that enthused about, and where you'll see like Turkey Tuesday or Weller Wednesday. It's like nobody does Maker's Monday. Why is that? So it's funny when you talk about the history of the brand, and I'd point you to the site www.malt-review.com, which is where you'll find the full write-up of this one. But I had a conversation with Brian Hara, who is in the Makers Ambassador program, and he was saying that when he was in college back in the 90s, that this was the premium bourbon. This was like what stockbrokers drank. If you were going to splurge and go to a party and try to really impress the host and get that nice bourbon, you were going to get Makers. And it's funny that now the world has evolved and Makers has kept on doing its own thing, but now it's undistinguished. It's just another bourbon that you'd pick up off the shelf. And I don't think that disdain is deserved, because Makers is a really tasty bourbon. It's particularly if you like a wheated mash bill, but it's just, in terms of the quality for the price versus what else is out there, like Makers is a solid pour, and you could certainly do a lot worse. Often if you're at a bar with like a limited selection, maybe you're in a hotel or maybe on an airplane or something, they don't have very much bourbon, but they do have Makers. Like it's a great go-to. So they were very staid for a while. They just kind of did their thing. And only recently, in the last 10 years, starting off with 2010 when they released 46, which is this finishing that they do on normal Maker's bourbon with extra staves, did we really start to see them start to expand the product range and be more innovative. Now they've got the private select program, so you can mix and match your own staves and make your own recipe of Maker's Mark. And you've got this cask strength offering, and so they've started to broaden it out a little bit. But in terms of the stuff that really drives bourbon lovers wild, they don't have all that representation in some of the different kinds of formats and things. And a lot of that has to do with the history of Makers, where for so long the emphasis was really on consistency. And I think that really demonstrates a heritage in whiskey making that is something that's been lost recently, as you've gotten more of these craft startup distilleries where the guys that are real legends in the business, so I'm thinking about Jimmy Russell and Parker Beam and Booker Noe and these guys, if you ask them, what makes a master distiller, because you got plenty of people calling themselves master distillers, the answer from those guys was consistent, and it was consistency. And that was something that they said, look, year in, year out, you got to be able to know what you're doing at every stage in the process. And that's where the mastery comes in, to be able to create a consistent flavor profile and make sure that Wild Turkey or that Jim Beam or that Heaven Hill bourbon, if it's Elijah Craig or Evan Williams, is going to taste consistent from year to year and batch to batch. And that's the way those guys were trained up and raised. And Makers has a lot of that in its DNA. So a big part of what they do is they rotate barrels through the rick houses. So there's not in the way that people will chase Wild Turkey from Camp Nelson F, or there are special rick houses at Buffalo Trace that give us some of the expressions that we know well, like Blanton's. These guys are very against that. They're trying to make sure that there's a leveling out by moving those barrels around, and they don't have the honey barrels necessarily. And as a consequence, you also don't see single barrels from Maker's Mark, and I think that's at the top of certainly my wish list. A bunch of people's wish lists is to have a single barrel expression eventually come out of Maker's Mark, and if it's a cask strength, all the better. But what we have today is Maker's Mark cask strength, not a single barrel, but a batched whiskey. And what I'll be expecting or trying to get out of this is you're going to want that normal Maker's profile, but with the knob dialed up to 11. You're going to want to really see that in overdrive, and some additional aromas and flavors and textures as a consequence of this being bottled at cask strength. So here we go. I'm going to just give you a little glimpse of that in the glass there. That is those beautiful orangey, like a fresh copper color. Got some light from my window coming through that, man. I've told you before, but I just love when light goes through whiskey. It's such a pretty color. Yeah, and straight away, there's a lot of notes that you guys are going to be familiar with from that softness and that sweetness of that Maker's Mash Bill, which is, as I said, wheated. Yeah, you got a lot of those ripe kind of cherry flavors in there. There's a lot of wood influence here, and I don't mean that in a bad way, where you've got, some of them, there's just like this overpowering wave. I think I've talked about like just a sloppy slap of oak that just overwhelms all the rest of the flavors. And the wood in here, I mean, the cask influence is evident, but it's so much better integrated. I should say, by the way, we're gently price sensitive, and retail prices for this is around $40. So slight premium to what you'd pay for your normal bottle of Maker's Mark, but like certainly nothing crazy in the grand spectrum of whiskey, and particularly like barrel proof whiskey, where you see some of the small batches from Heaven Hill that are now fetching 60, 70, $80, and so on and so forth. Okay, just giving this a little bit more of a nose. It's great orangey, like a really like orange peel, that kind of like oily, very piquant, sharp orangey flavor. Yeah, I mean, I like to think that I might have pegged this for Makers, although I don't know. Everything is so much more intense that, like I said, the volume knob is just really dialed up. There's so much more here in terms of the intensity of this aromatically. But I love what I'm smelling. It smells like great bourbon. Yeah, some more of those woody vanilla notes from the barrel, but just very subtly integrated and always balanced against what you're getting in terms of the fruit. And there's even a bit of stone in here, just like a really kind of a more pert or austere limestone note. So you've got that going for you. But I'm gonna just go ahead and give this a little kiss. As you know, I like to just get it on the lips here, and really kind of let it sit as a first impression. And like a lot of barrel proof whiskey, this is jumping right into the mouth. It leaps out of the glass, and the nose is unmistakable, and you don't have to really try too hard with this, and it is really up front, and that is true on the palate as well. Like, even just have it on my lips, it's like already bursting back into the mouth. So just around the front of the mouth there, I'm going to get that little swirl, and again, all those aromas and more. Oh man, this is I'm warning you guys right now. I think I'm falling in love. This might be a new favorite here. Wow. Okay. So I'm gonna take a minute here and just kind of talk you through the progression of this through the mouth, because it's really lovely. So at the front, again, very pert. That limestone note, you've got a kind of an astringent tannic woodiness. And then it kind of becomes like a little bit more of an elegant, graceful progression towards the top of the tongue, where again you get that tannic woodiness reemerging, but in a good way, in a sharp, crisp, clean, delineated way, not like in a bad, like again a sloppy cask. I'm getting more anise on the nose as I have this in the mouth, and then just it really blooms towards the back of the tongue with like all these great, again, orange, cherry, these fruity flavors, and then this lingers a little bit. The finish is maybe the weakest part of the mouthfeel, but that's because it's got intense competition in terms of all these other elements. So getting a lingering, like almost like a tobacco note, like a dried tobacco leaf note, and then this just kind of fades out into this, again, this drying minerality through the back of the mouth, and there's that heat that radiates around the mouth. So again, first impressions, this is the very first sip of this I've ever taken in my life, but I am a real big fan. I've had this open for just a minute, so this is, of course, change once the bottle's open for a little while, and I'm going to have a couple glasses of this over the course of a couple weeks here to just try to make sure I'm getting the full picture. But yeah, I mean, if you compare this to other barrel proof offerings, something in rare breed, I'm thinking Elijah Craig barrel proof, Larceny barrel proof is probably the most obvious comparison given the wheated mash bill. This is great. This holds its own in every regard. It's got all the facets you want from a barrel proof bourbon, and then the price just can't be beat, in comparison. So positively predisposed. I'll give you my final thoughts at www.malt-review.com. But just as always, grateful for the opportunity to share a little bourbon and a little chat with you. So cheers.